Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. The price of a first-class stamp is set to rise above £1 in April, Royal Mail has announced. From the 3rd of April, first-class stamps will increase by 15 pence to £1.10, while second-class stamps will rise by 7 pence to 75 pence. Royal Mail said the increases were needed to ensure the one price goes anywhere universal service remains sustainable, but Citizens Advice said nobody should be paying more for a subpar service and called for the regulator to act. The price increases will come in the day before the first stamps with the image of King Charles go on general sale. Royal Mail said the changes had been subject to careful consideration, with letter volumes down 25% since the pandemic and with the business facing rising costs. We appreciate that many businesses and households are facing a challenging economic environment, and we are committed to keeping our prices affordable, said Nick Landon, Chief Commercial Officer at Royal Mail. We have to carefully balance our pricing against a continued decline in letter volumes and increasing costs of delivering letters 6 days a week to an ever-growing number of addresses across the country. However, the move was sharply criticised by Citizens Advice. These record-breaking prices couldn't be coming at a worse time for consumers who will now be paying 64% more for a first-class stamp than 5 years ago, said Matthew Apton, Director of Policy at Citizens Advice. He added that with millions missing important letters as a result of postal delays, nobody should be paying more for this kind of subpar service. Ofcom should be holding Royal Mail to account, but it's letting the company get away with rocketing prices and over 2 years of missed delivery targets. The regulator said it caps the price of second-class stamps to make sure an affordable option is always available, but it said Royal Mail needed flexibility on pricing decisions of first-class stamps to make sure the universal postal service can continue. Royal Mail said it remained committed to the universal service, which means it is required to deliver letters at a uniform price to UK addresses 6 days a week. However, it added that the costs of meeting it were increasing, with the number of letters sent having fallen from more than 20 billion in 2004 to 2005 to about 8 billion a year now. It added that it expected to report a full-year loss of between 350 million and 450 million pounds. Last year, Royal Mail asked the government if it could drop Saturday letter deliveries by changing its universal service obligation from 6 days a week to 5. Royal Mail has also been hit by strike action in a long-running dispute with Communication Workers Union over pay and conditions. The company has said that the strikes, which included several in the run-up to Christmas, have cost it millions. The UK is on the cusp of securing a new Brexit deal on Northern Ireland, the Deputy Prime Minister has said. Dominic Raab told the BBC the government had made great progress negotiating with the European Union. The UK wants to change the Northern Ireland Protocol, an agreement with the EU, which sees certain goods checked when entering from the rest of the UK. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said he was giving the negotiations everything in an attempt to clinch a deal. Speaking on BBC Sunday with Laura Koonsberg, Mr Raab said, "We're on the cusp, we've made great progress, we're not there yet, but it would be a really important deal. I think it would mark a paradigm shift, first and foremost for the communities in Northern Ireland, but I think it would be a significant achievement." The Democratic Unionist Party has complained about what it calls a democratic deficit, with Northern Ireland being subject to EU rules while not having a say on them. Mr Raab said the EU had moved on some issues, saying if there are any new rules that would apply in relation to Northern Ireland, it must be right that there is a Northern Irish democratic check on that. The protocol signed by Boris Johnson in 2020 sees Northern Ireland continue to follow some EU laws so that goods can flow freely over the border to the Irish Republic without checks. The DUP believes the protocol undermines the nation's position within the rest of the UK, as well as having an adverse impact on trade flow. The party has prevented a Northern Ireland devolved government from forming, leaving it in political gridlock. Mr Raab said the UK wants to see a move away from checks on every consignment of goods coming into Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. The EU is worried about goods posing a threat to the single market by moving between Northern Ireland and the EU. He suggested an intelligence-based rather than tick-box approach for goods, which effectively means they look at what is happening in the Republic with goods that go to Northern Ireland in case there's a risk of them going into the wider single market, and if we can achieve that, it will be a massive win. What is the Northern Ireland Protocol? The Northern Ireland Protocol is a trading arrangement negotiated during Brexit talks. It allows goods to be transported across the Irish land border without the need for checks. Before Brexit, it was easy to transport goods across this border because both sides followed the same EU rules. After the UK left, special trading arrangements were needed because Northern Ireland has a land border with the Republic of Ireland, which is part of the EU. The EU has strict food rules and requires border checks when certain goods such as milk and eggs arrive from non-EU countries. The land border is a sensitive issue because of Northern Ireland's troubled political history. It was feared that cameras or border posts as part of these checks could lead to instability. The UK and the EU agreed that protecting the Northern Ireland peace deal, the Good Friday Agreement, was an absolute priority. So both sides signed the Northern Ireland Protocol as part of the Brexit withdrawal agreement. It is now part of international law. Rishi Sunak said on Saturday his government was giving it everything we've got to finalise a deal to fix issues with the protocol, but he has been warned by by Eurosceptic Conservative MPs not to rush into calling a vote in Parliament on the new agreement. Asked if MPs would get to vote on any new deal, Mr Raab said Parliament will have its ability to express itself. Mark Francois, who heads the European Research Group of Eurosceptic Tory MPs, warned Mr Sunak it would be incredibly unwise to bring in any new deal without giving MPs a vote. He told Sky News, "Don't try to bounce Parliament next week because that is likely to go badly wrong. So if they've got a deal they're proud of, show us the text, let us run it by our lawyers, let us fully understand what it means, then at that point we might be ready to vote on it." He added that EU law needed to be expunged from Northern Ireland, bringing it in line with England, Scotland and Wales. But former Prime Minister John Major urged Conservative and DUP members not to rush into calling a vote in Parliament on the new agreement. Asked if MPs would get to vote on any new deal, to not let concerns over the European Court of Justice get in the way of easing trade and restoring the devolved government in Northern Ireland. He told BBC Radio 4 Westminster Hour their involvement would be tiny. Occasional involvement of the ECJ really ought not to stop an agreement being made. They talk of democracy. Democracy is thrown away when that Northern Ireland Assembly is not sitting. We need them back. Speaking on Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy said his party would vote for a new deal in the national interest of the UK and restoring Northern Ireland's Assembly. Our judgment is that any deal that emerges will be better than what we've had now. On Saturday, the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar also said the deal was inching towards a conclusion and urged the EU and the UK to go the extra mile to close the deal. The Chancellor is expected to extend the energy price guarantee at current levels for a further 3 months. Typical household energy bills were scheduled to rise to £3,000 a year from April, but calls have been made for the government to retain its current level of support with the cap at £2,500. The level of help is now expected to be maintained, but energy firms have been asked to prepare for both scenarios. The Treasury declined to comment. At the moment, the government is limiting the typical household bill to £2,500 a year, plus a £400 winter discount. From the 1st of April, the help is scheduled to be scaled back, and the £400 discount will come to an end, which could push people's bills up despite the weather getting warmer. Fuel poverty campaigners have said the number of households struggling to afford bills could rise 6.7 million to 8.4 million as a result of the April rise. However, industry sources told the BBC that some energy companies have already started amending future bills to reflect that energy help will continue at or very near to current levels beyond the 1st of April. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to date has declined to extend the support at the current rate, but experts have suggested it is increasingly likely he will change course, probably at the budget on the 15th of March. Mr Hunt told the BBC last month that the policy was under review. The Treasury was understood to be concerned that an open-ended commitment would leave British public finances significantly exposed to any further unexpected rise in global gas prices. Instead, the decrease in support will kick in the summer, when it will not be needed, because the separate energy price cap is already anticipated to be lower as a result of declining market gas prices. However, the £400 winter payment that has led to a £66 per month reduction in monthly payments on many bills does look likely to end next month. There have been no talks about extending this element of support. The Resolution Foundation think tank, which aims to improve living standards for people on low to middle incomes, and consumer rights champion Martin Lewis have both called on Mr Hunt to cancel the bill's rise opposition parties. Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said families are really worried about prices soaring in April, and so it's urgent the government gives them reassurances now and extends the windfall tax on oil and gas giants to give them support for their energy bills as Labour would. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, IFS, and Economics Research Institute has forecast that the Treasury could afford to keep supporting at current levels until the summer due to wholesale energy prices falling sharply, meaning the cost of the scheme has been cut. Energy UK, which represents suppliers, urged the government earlier this week to hold the level of support at £2,500 for a typical household and to announce that quickly so firms could price it into bills from April. Energy Secretary Grant Shapps previously said he was sympathetic to suggestions that the planned £500 rise in bills should be stopped. However, there is an alternative view that money would be better spent by the government by targeting support for those on the lowest incomes, as is the case for cost of living payments and in the winter. Vulnerable groups could benefit substantially from this extra funding if it was used in a more targeted way, and should these groups take precedence over universal payments to multiple homeowners and billionaires, said Joe Malinowski, founder of comparison site Energy Scanner. There has been a drop in wholesale gas and electricity prices in recent weeks that has raised hopes that the worst of the energy crisis could be easing. Bills began rising as COVID lockdowns ended, but the war in Ukraine saw them surge further. Without the government's energy price guarantee to limit prices, a typical household gas and electricity bill would have hit £4,279 a year from January under the energy price cap set by Ofgem, the industry regulator. The mother of a woman killed by her pilot husband more than a decade ago has called on the Justice Secretary to intervene over his possible release. British Airways captain Robert Brown admitted the manslaughter of his wife, Joanna, 46, in 2010 and was jailed for 26 years. Her mother, Diana Parks, aged 83, asked Dominic Raab to meet her to discuss her family's concerns. Mr. Raab said he would look at the parole case very rigorously. The former pilot bludgeoned his wife to death with a claw hammer in their family home in Berkshire, October 2010, as their 2 young children cowered in a playroom. He buried his wife's body in a pre-dug grave in Windsor Great Park. Brown, who believed he was stitched up by a prenuptial agreement, was acquitted of murder by a jury at Reading Crown Court in May 2011. He had previously admitted manslaughter on the ground of diminished responsibility. Brown, formerly of North Street, Winkfield, was sentenced to 24 years for manslaughter and a further 2 years for an offence of obstructing a coroner in the execution of his duty. Miss Parks has said the family is very fearful about the prospect of Brown being released later in the year without first being mentally assessed. She said she wanted to meet Mr. Raab so I can explain in person why this case has gone so wrong. Speaking on Sunday to Laura Kuenssberg, Mr. Raab said of course he would meet the family. Within the powers I've got, I'll look at this, as I would any other, very rigorously. He said he could not comment on whether he would block Brown's release, but said parole decisions were scrutinised exceptionally carefully. I've also been clear I don't think the parole service powers are adequate at the moment, which is why we'll be bringing forward legislation to reform that. I hope that's something which will have widespread support. The oil used to anoint the king in the coronation is one of the most sacred and mysterious parts of the ceremony, and a new quantity has been prepared, but reflecting modern animal-friendly sensitivities, this oil will not include any ingredients from animals. The chrism oil for the coronation was consecrated in a religious ceremony in Jerusalem on Friday. This was carried out in one of the city's holiest Christian sites, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Previous versions have included civet oil from the glands of the small mammals and ambergris from the intestines of whales. There have been concerns about animal cruelty and the need to protect wildlife, and the latest formula for the holy oil, for King Charles' coronation, will be animal-free. Although the coronation is seen as a great moment of national pageantry and historic rituals, there is a strong religious element. The anointing of the king has echoes of a christening or the ordination into religious orders, with the monarch being symbolically touched with holy oil on the head, chest and hands. This was considered such a sacred moment that the television cameras were not allowed to film it in 1953, and there has been speculation about whether the anointing will be shown on TV during King Charles' coronation on the 6th of May. The new oil includes olive oil scented with a mix of essential oils, sesame, rose, jasmine, cinnamon, neroli and benzoin, with orange blossom also added. It also has a royal family significance, partly using olives grown into the Mount of Olives at the monastery of Mary Magdalene, which is where the king's grandmother, Princess Alice, is buried. In his Christmas message, the king had spoken of his own Christian faith and how much he had been moved when he visited biblical sites, such as Jesus' birthplace in Bethlehem. The oil was consecrated by the Patriarch of Jerusalem and the Anglican Archbishop in Jerusalem at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built on the site where it is believed Jesus died and was buried. Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, welcomed the use of oil from the Mount of Olives, a site outside Jerusalem with many biblical connections. This demonstrates the deep historic link between the coronation, the Bible and the Holy Land, said the Archbishop. He added, from ancient kings through to present day, monarchs have been anointed with oil from this sacred place. The implements used for the anointing, including a spoon, are rare survivors of the original medieval coronation regalia, most of which were destroyed on the orders of Oliver Cromwell in 1649. Scotland's next First Minister should not roll back equal rights, SNP leadership contender Humza Yousaf has said. The Health Secretary told BBC Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg he would be a leader for all of Scotland. Last week, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes admitted she would not have voted for equal marriage had she been an MSP in 2014. She later said she would protect rights, particularly of minorities. Mr Yousaf and Miss Forbes are running against former Minister Ash Regan. The ballot of SNP members, which will use a single transferable vote system, opens on the 13th of March, and the winner will be announced on the 27th of March. On Sunday, Mr Yousaf was asked if it would be acceptable if Nicola Sturgeon's successor did not agree with equal marriage. He told the programme not if they would roll back on those rights. I don't think that's acceptable. If they were able to disassociate their view and not to let that interfere with policy making or legislating, then I think that's a different matter. Mr Yousaf questioned what would happen if an MSP introduced a bill to challenge the Marriage and Civil Partnerships Scotland Act. He added, people in our society need to know that whoever is going to be their First Minister will stand up for those rights, will advance rights where possible, and make sure that there is not regression of rights. Mr Yousaf also defended his record in government as Transport, Justice and now Health Secretary. On the issue issue of independence, the Glasgow Pollock MSP said he was not wedded to the idea, but put forward by Miss Sturgeon last year of making the next UK election a de facto referendum. He added, "If we create the sustained settled will, the majority of people supporting independence, then of course those political obstacles that are put in our way by the opposition, they will crumble." Similarly, Ash Regan said she did not believe it was appropriate to fight the next general election on the single issue of independence. Speaking to BBC Scotland's The Sunday Show, Miss Regan said, "We need to see if there's another way forward for Scotland. I believe that Scotland will choose to become an independent country when they feel the government is acting wisely, governing competently and fairly." Kate Forbes has also talked of the need to build unstoppable levels of support for independence. She previously told the BBC the strategy needed a reset and that it was not as simple as targeting a majority at an election. The first full week of the leadership contest has focused on the candidates' views on social issues, with Miss Forbes facing criticism from within her own party after her comments on gay marriage. Miss Forbes, a devout member of the Free Church of Scotland, also said she would not have voted for the Scottish Government's gender reforms in December, and that according to her religious beliefs, having children outside marriage was wrong. Several of Miss Forbes' backers have withdrawn their endorsements, with Deputy First Minister John Swiney questioning whether someone who holds her views would be an appropriate choice to lead the party and the country. The Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch MSP later attempted to reset her campaign, saying she felt greatly burdened that some of her comments had caused hurt, and pledging to defend to the hilt the rights of all people in Scotland to live without fear of harassment. Meanwhile, Mr Youssef came under the spotlight for his decision to miss the final vote on Scotland's equal marriage legislation. Former Minister Alex Neil said the Health Secretary arranged a meeting in February 2014 as cover, but Mr Youssef said he had an unavoidable engagement about a death row prisoner in Pakistan. He has also faced criticism over the state of the NHS, particularly waiting times in Scotland's hospitals. On Thursday, opposition politicians said Mr Youssef should be sacked rather than promoted after a spending watchdog warned health service jobs targets under Scotland's COVID recovery plans were unlikely to be met. The third contender, Ash Regan, formally launched her campaign in North Queensferry on Friday. The former Community Safety Minister pledged to unite the party, set up an independence commission on her first day in the job, and said she would not challenge the government's decision to block the Gender Recognition Act. Miss Regan, who resigned as Community Safety Minister over Scottish Government's plans to make it easier for someone to change their legally recognised sex, also expressed concern about the current net zero targets. The Edinburgh Eastern MSP said the SNP had always been a broad church and pledged to heal the divisions that have emerged in the past few years. She added, "Everyone is going to make up and move on." A panel-based poll for the Sunday Times suggested Miss Forbes is the preferred candidate to be the next SNP leader and First Minister. A total of 1,026 voters in Scotland were polled between February 21st and the 24th. The poll said 23% said they would like Miss Forbes to be the next SNP leader, with 15% saying so for Mr Youssef and 7% saying so for Miss Regan. The response of don't know was on 49% in answer to this question. Thousands of social housing managers in England could be required to gain formal qualifications as part of government plans to improve standards. Landlords would also have to investigate and fix damp within strict time limits. The proposals come in response to the death of 2-year-old Awab Ashik, who was exposed to mould at his family's home in Rochdale in 2020. Housing Secretary Michael Gove said people had been inexcusably let down. The plans, which would need to be voted through in Parliament, stipulate that managers must have a qualification that comes from a provider regulated by exams watchdog Ofqual, equivalent to a level 4 or 5 certificate or diploma in housing. Alternatively, they could have a foundation degree from the Chartered Institute of Housing. It would affect about 25,000 people who currently work in the roles. The government said ensuring managers had appropriate qualifications would bring social housing more closely into line with other sectors, providing frontline services, including social work, teaching and health and care services. The changes would be made through amendments to the Social Housing Regulation Bill, according to the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. The legislation is expected to return to Parliament on the 1st of March. Any landlord who failed to meet the new standards requirements could eventually receive an unlimited fine from the regulator of social housing. Social housing campaigner Kwajo Twenboa said he thought the proposals would increase professionalism in the sector. This should have happened 40 years ago. It should have happened when social housing was first introduced, he told BBC Breakfast. I think the government could go even further with extending the requirements to be qualified when working in housing right down to housing officers. The proposals are the latest step in response to the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people in the West London Tower block. Grenfell United, a group of survivors and bereaved family members, said it welcomed the proposals. For 6 years, we have worked relentlessly to hold the government to account to change social housing for tenants across the country. We never gave up. We pushed for professionalism and for robust regulation regulation to ensure residents are treated with respect and humanity. Mr. Gove said both Grenfell and the death of Awab Ishaq showed the devastating consequences of residents inexcusably being let down by poor performing landlords who consistently failed to listen to them. He continued, "We know that many social housing residents are not receiving the service or respect they deserve. The changes we are delivering today will make sure social housing managers across the country have the right skills and experience to deliver an excellent service and drive up standards across the board." Shadow Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook said, "We know from the circumstances leading up to the fire at Grenfell and those surrounding the death of Awab Ishaq that poorly managed social housing can literally kill. It is therefore essential that those managing the homes of social tenants have the necessary qualifications and training to ensure that all tenants are treated with fairness, dignity and respect." A woman with terminal cancer who decided to throw a party rather than have a funeral said she had the best night of her life. Linda Williams, aged 76 from High Wycombe, hates funerals and wanted to be able to dance the night away with her friends instead. After being diagnosed with terminal cancer a year ago, she started organising the party. "I had an absolute blast," the former Tai Chi instructor said. "I've never been to a good funeral, they're miserable things, so I decided I wanted a celebration of my life. I nearly died 2 weeks before it, so I had a cardboard cutout made just in case, but I was able to be there with all my friends." Miss Williams has always loved Spitfires. Her parents were both in the RAF and she grew up near the base in Walters Ash, where she used to see the planes flying over her house. She started writing a bucket list when she was diagnosed, and number one was a flight in a Spitfire. "It was absolutely crazy, fantastic and more than I ever wished for." And her son followed behind in a chaser plane. Next up was the 1940s themed party, which was held in October, that featured 6 performances, a raffle, a Union Jack cake and Spam sandwiches. "I themed my party around the Battle of Britain, which felt perfect because the 1940s were all about pulling together when you have nothing and sacrificing to keep your freedom." She dressed as a Spitfire pilot and wore a parachute tied to her back as if she had just jumped out the plane. The 124 guests had to use the code word Enigma to gain entry to the party. However, Miss Williams nearly did not make the big event after her health deteriorated. "I very nearly died just before it, but I thought I'm going to absolutely get there. I just decided I would go for it and everybody had a phenomenal time. I was so excited I got there at 6 p.m. It didn't kick off until 7:30. My legs were swollen, but I still managed to dance all night and I had lots of lovely cuddles. I didn't leave until 1 in the morning. I was high on adrenaline and I slept for nearly 2 days after." Miss Williams said she was so grateful to her friends for organising the party. She met many of them at a Lindy Hop dance class she started attending at the age of 69. One of them, Joe Oxlade, said it was fantastic to be involved in planning such a unique celebration. "Linda was very clear with us from the start that this party would go ahead whether she was here or not. She said, if I'm there on the night, I want this song, but if I have died, I want a different song. So we had very clear instructions. She is just an amazing and inspiring person. We are very lucky to have been friends with her." A few months ago, Miss Williams decided she had had enough of hospitals and made the decision to be cared for at home by nurses from the charity Rennie Grove Hospice Care. Miss Williams credits her wonderful nurses with keeping her alive long enough to attend the party. "They saved my life on that occasion, which meant I could attend my own party celebrating friendship, camaraderie, and the joy of dance." Fiona O'Neill, a senior hospice at home nurse, said, "Lynn is such a fighter. She made sure that she pulled through and made it to her party. She always sees the positive in life and is a real pleasure to care for." Video conferencing platform Zoom has sacked its president, Greg Tomb, a former Google executive. Mr. Tomb's contract was abruptly terminated without cause, according to the company in a regulatory filing. The businessman had taken up the role in June 2022 and had been active on earnings calls and overseeing the company's sales. A spokesperson for Zoom said the tech firm isn't looking for a replacement. Mr. Tomb reportedly directly to Chief Executive Officer Eric Yuan, who started Zoom in 2011 and was at the helm at the company, became one of the pandemic's biggest winners. Zoom became a household name as people needed to stay at home and screen time increased. There were Zoom weddings and funerals, and by April 2020, the company said 300 million daily participants were on Zoom calls. At the time of Mr. Tomb's appointment, Mr. Yuan said he was excited about the strength he was adding to the leadership team. Greg is a highly respected technology industry leader and has deep experience in helping to scale companies at critical junctures. Mr. Tomb said he was thrilled to join the team and help drive growth as businesses around the world address their communication needs, but it has been a difficult picture for the company, which has struggled to maintain its pandemic boom, and like many others in the tech sector, it has been forced to lay off staff. Despite Zoom tripling its headcount in 2 years during the pandemic, in February the company cut 15% of its staff, 1,300 people, to deal with waning demand. "We didn't take as much time as we should have to thoroughly analyse our teams or assess if we were growing sustainably towards the highest priorities," Mr. Young said. As companies look to cut costs in the face of an economic downturn, Zoom could be left behind declined in favour of rival services such as Google Meet, Microsoft Teams and Slack. Zoom is trying to diversify. Last year it announced plans to integrate email and calendar features and a chatbot to help users with troubleshoot issues. Zoom Sports is also in the works. Shortages of some fruit and vegetables will last for 3 to 4 weeks, a former Environment Secretary has said. George Eustice also insisted there was nothing much the government could have done to prevent empty shelves in supermarkets. The government and industry have blamed bad weather in Spain and North Africa for the squeezes, but as chef and restaurateur Thomasina Mears warned the food system was completely broken. Major UK supermarkets have been placing limits on fruit and vegetable sales after shortages, and consumers have faced empty shelves in some shops. There are shortages of tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, salad bags, broccoli and cauliflowers. Producers have warned that shortages could last until May, with the situation being made worse by UK growers delaying planting crops because of high energy costs. But speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Koonsberg show, Mr Eustace said he expected the problems to last around 3 to 4 weeks. He blamed a cocktail of weather events for the problems and added that food prices were always closely linked to energy prices, which spiked due to the war in Ukraine. He also said there was not much difference between the government and what they could have done in recent months, and there's nothing they can do immediately to avoid the problems affecting supply chains. Mr Eustace said supermarkets have to work to get it right to ensure the disruption to supplies of some vegetables are restored. He did acknowledge that action was needed longer term. We should be committing to onshore production, so glasshouse production of cucumbers and tomatoes, we should be trying to build that here, he said. But Miss Mears, who runs the Oaxaca chain of restaurants, called for an overhaul of the government's approach to food, describing the UK's food system as completely broken. She said there's a time bomb we're sitting on. She warned if we think cucumbers and tomatoes are bad, we are looking at way worse in the next decade. Miss Mears called for more investment in regenerative farming and using technology to support farmers to move to more sustainable methods of food production. Mr Eustace defended the government's record, saying, "We've now got nearly half the farmers in what we call countryside stewardship doing exactly the sort of regenerative agriculture that Thomasina talks about." In mid-March, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will unveil his budget. He'll say how much of our money the government will take in taxes and what it will be spent on. So what is the budget? Each year, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is in charge of the government's finances, makes a budget statement to MPs in the House of Commons. It outlines the government's plans for raising or lowering taxes. The budget also includes a big decision on spending on health, schools, police and other public services. When is the budget? The budget speech will be delivered on Wednesday the 15th of March. It usually starts at around 12:30 UK time and lasts about an hour. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer will give his response straight after. After the speech, the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, which monitors government spending, will publish a report on how the economy is doing. What could be in this year's budget? The outlook for the UK economy in 2023 to 2024 is slightly less bleak than it was last year, but public finances remain fragile, with the soaring cost of living and massive support for energy bills driving up government borrowing. As a result, Mr Hunt has said he is unlikely to be able to make significant tax cuts. However, he is now under pressure to keep struggling households, and a number of measures could be introduced. Energy support expected to be maintained. Currently, the government is limiting the energy bill of a typical household to £2,500 a year. This is due to rise to £3,000 on the 1st of April. However, the BBC understands that the Chancellor is expected to keep the energy price guarantee at current levels for a further 3 months from April. Campaigners and opposition parties have pointed out that a fall in wholesale energy prices has sharply cut the cost of offering support. According to the Guardian newspaper, the Treasury is considering a plan to massively expand free childcare to 1 and 2-year-olds in England. Parents of children aged 9 months to 3 years would get 30 hours of free care a week during term time, subject to conditions. Currently, the benefit only applies to children aged 3 and 4. In terms of fuel duty, according to the Times newspaper, fuel duty could be frozen for a year. Rishi Sunak cut the tax by 5 pence in March last year when he was Chancellor, in response to record prices at the pump linked to the war in Ukraine. This measure is due to end in March, with fuel poverty and fuel duty predicted to rise by up to 23%. In terms of the state pension, currently men and women can start drawing down their state pensions when they turn 66. That is due to gradually increase to 67 between 2026 and 2028, and to 68 from 2044 to 2046. But reports suggest a review into the state pension age will recommend that the increase to 68 will be moved forward to the mid-2030s. If true, it would mean millions of workers born in the 1970s would have to push back their retirement plans. It comes as Mr Hunt is trying to lure people over age 50 back to the labour force to tackle worker shortages in many industries, and the tax-free allowance on pensions could rise. Currently, the so-called lifetime allowance, how much you can save in your pension pot before being hit with a tax charge, is 1.73 million, a level it would be frozen at until 2026, with pensioners more likely to be dragged into paying tax. adds, some may retire early, something Mr. Hunt doesn't want. He told older workers in a speech that last month, we will look at the conditions necessary to make work worth your while. Does the budget affect all parts of the UK? Some parts of the budget, such as defence spending, affect the whole of the UK. Others, such as education, only affect England. This is because Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland make their own decisions. Scotland has income tax raising powers, which means its rates differ from the rest of the UK. The Scottish Government published its last budget on the 15th of December 2022 for the year 2023 to 2024. If the government announces extra spending on areas that only affect England, the other nations get an equivalent extra sum of money to spend as they choose, according to a rule called the Barnett Formula. The body of a missing hill walker who failed to return from a planned trip has been found in a deep gorge in Glencoe following a search. Carl Sambrook from West Yorkshire arrived in the Highlands on the 18th of February and had intended to walk and wild camp accompanied by his beagle called Bane. Police said their bodies had been found in the area at about 2:15 p.m. on Saturday. The force added there did not appear to be suspicious circumstances. A report will be submitted to the Procurator Fiscal. Mr. Sambrook had in plan to ascend the 3,353 feet or 1,022 metre mountain Buchail Ative Moor. A major search was launched when he did not return, involving Glencoe Lochaber, Oban and RAF Mountain Rescue Team volunteers, as well as HM Coast Guard. Glencoe Mountain Rescue Team said volunteers had found the bodies of a man and a dog in a deep gorge about the Fiona Glen. A Police Scotland spokesperson said Mr. Sambrook's family wished to thank all involved in the search and had requested their privacy be respected. They added, our thoughts are with Carl's family as we support them at this difficult time. The singer, who went viral on TikTok while still working in a supermarket, says it was a shock to reach the top 20 in the official singles chart. May Stevens has more than 11 million views on the social media platform for a song If We Ever Broke Up. The 19-year-old from Kettering has now been signed to EMI Records and is working on more music. She said being in the charts was absolutely incredible. Stevens' song went viral on video sharing site TikTok after a snippet of it was posted on New Year's Day. If We Ever Broke Up entered the official singles chart at 45 2 weeks ago, but has now climbed to a high of 20 on the latest countdown announced on Friday. The singer, who has been writing since the age of 12, has been working shifts in a local supermarket, but has since quit a job to work on her music full time. She said, it's a bit of a shock, to be honest. I still can't believe everything that happened to me. I feel so lucky to have this in my life and to be blessed as a musician. It's so surreal. It feels like I'm in a dream. Stevens said she was in the process of getting a music video for the song and arranging some live performances. My entire family are still in shock. I'm still their little girl, she added. The singer said her life had become very busy, but she was still able to spend time with her family and partner, who she described as incredible and very supportive. Female Derby County fans have hit back at a claim they were responsible for a poor atmosphere inside Pride Park. A tweet by a male supporter suggested women in the stadium's south stand were glued to their phones during a recent match and should stay home. Other fans, both male and female, condemned the view as an example of sexism, which permits and persists among some supporters. Rams fan Amina Warren, aged 19, said, you are going to get people who are idiots, and every club will have that in their fan base, but one of the things Derby is proud of is that we have a very diverse club and a strong female following. To have an individual come and try to jeopardise that and give us a bad name publicly is not what anybody wants to see. We have to stand up to that. It is ridiculous and it upsets people. She added, children, men, women, everyone contributes to the atmosphere in the south stand. We are all to the following the club for the same reasons, to get behind the team. It's okay to complain the atmosphere occasionally goes flat and be frustrated about that, but to blame it on a specific group of people, and precisely female people, is ridiculous. It's not really helpful. Emily Webster, who has been going to Pride Park for 18 years, said, I have the typical comments like, you can't like football because you're a girl, or if you like football as much as you say you do, describe and explain the offside rule. She said 2 decades ago, such comments had probably been a sign of the times, but I could believe it to hear it recently. It's shocking, she said. Men and women don't watch football for a different reason. We watch it simply because we want to watch it. Despite the tweet, Miss Webster said she was still proud to be a Derby fan. She added that tweet has actually brought a lot of us together, and there's nothing that could change the way I feel about being a Derby fan. Caroline Hulbert has been going to Derby matches for 9 years and said, it's absolutely crazy. You just wouldn't expect anything like that in 2023. There are so many female Derby fans. I don't know why they think women are part of the problem of a lack of atmosphere. The person who tweeted it may have sisters and daughters themselves, and putting that message out there in this light and day is absolutely crazy. Maybe they put it out there to start a big drama, but surely they can't be serious about it. It's sad and baffling. I think it's a minority who think like this, and my personal experiences of being a Derby fan have been positive. Some people just spread negativity. A Derby County spokesperson said, we welcome every fan to Pride Park Stadium and are proud of the magnificent support the club receives. There is no room for discrimination of any kind and no single defined way to support the team unless unless it breaches the code of unacceptable behaviour. A 14-year-old boy has been charged after a car crashed into a house in Derby. Derbyshire police said the crash occurred in Grampian Way, close to the Swallowdale Road roundabout at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday. Officers had just begun pursuing the vehicle after it was taken from a nearby property. The boy is accused of aggravated vehicle taking, driving without a licence and driving without insurance. The boy, who cannot be named for legal reasons, is due to appear at Southern Derbyshire Magistrate Court on Monday. Police said the crash happened after an officer spotted the VW Sharon, which had been taken from Stenson Road. After pursuit of a matter of seconds, the car crashed into the house. The boy was arrested at the scene and taken to hospital as a precaution, but was not found to be seriously injured. Police initially said structural engineers had found the house was so badly damaged it would need to be demolished along with the adjoining home. The force later clarified that was not the case, with assessments ongoing as to the structural integrity of the buildings. The section of Grampian Way remains closed following the crash, and the public has been urged not to approach the homes due to the danger they pose. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has said he would resign if an inquiry finds he has bullied civil servants. A senior lawyer is investigating 8 complaints of bullying against Mr Raab, who was appointed Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary last October. When asked if he was a bully on the BBC Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Mr Raab replied no, saying he had always behaved professionally. He told Sky News, if an allegation of bullying is upheld, I would resign. Speaking on the BBC, Mr Raab said, I am confident I behaved professionally throughout. Asked whether there should be more plain speaking in politics, he replied, yes, absolutely. It was right for ministers to challenge assumptions and test ideas when working with civil servants, he added. The bullying complaints relate to Mr Raab's previous periods as Justice Secretary and Foreign Secretary under Boris Johnson and his time as Brexit Secretary under Theresa May. In November, the Prime Minister appointed Adam Tolley, KC, to investigate the allegations of bullying against Mr Raab. At least 3 senior civil servants who worked with Mr Raab had given evidence to the inquiry into his behaviour as witnesses. The BBC has found that other civil servants who allegedly planned to file complaints did not, after learning they would have been identified to Mr Raab as part of Mr Tolley's inquiry. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Raab said he would learn lessons as we go over his dealings with civil servants, but added, I think for the lion's share of the time, civil servants and ministers work very effectively together. Dave Penman, General Secretary of the FDA union, which represents civil servants, dismissed Mr Raab's comments. Mr Penman told the Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg show, the picture he paints is that everything is fine in the civil service and the relationship between ministers and civil servants is okay. That's not the picture civil servants speak of, that's not their experience. The FDA has found 1 in 6 civil servants had seen unacceptable workplace behaviour by a minister in the past year. The findings came from the union's annual survey of senior civil servants, which also found 69.3% of respondents said they had no confidence in the current complaints system. The survey was conducted over 4 weeks leading up to the 13th of January and had 650 respondents. The headcount of the senior civil servants is around 7,000. Both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have called for Rishi Sunak to suspend Mr Raab during Mr Tolley's investigation. The Prime Minister has said he will wait for the outcome of the inquiry before taking any action. Mr Sunak has come under increasing pressure to explain what he knew about the allegations before reappointing Mr Raab as to the Cabinet. In November, the Prime Minister repeatedly declined to say whether he had informal warnings about Mr Raab's behaviour before bringing him back into government. Mr Tolley is not expected to report his findings for several weeks, and the Prime Minister will decide the Justice Secretary's political future when the investigation concludes. Privately, many Conservative MPs, including ministers, have told the BBC they fear the allegations could yet cost Mr Raab his job. Mr Raab was Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister when Boris Johnson was succeeded by Liz Truss. She sacked him, but he was reappointed to those roles when Mr Sunak entered Downing Street in October. Mr Raab previously served in the Cabinet as Foreign Secretary from 2020 to 2021 and Brexit Secretary in 2018. British microchip designer ARM says it will not pursue a London Stock Exchange listing this year. Cambridge-based firm designs the tech behind processors, commonly known as chips, that power devices from smartphones to games consoles. Reports in January said Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had restarted talks with ARM's owner, Japanese investment giant SoftBank, about a possible UK listing. ARM says it decided a sole US listing in 2023 was the best path forward. Chief Executive Rene Haas said in a statement after engagement with the British government and the Financial Conduct Authority over several months, SoftBank and ARM have determined that pursuing a US-only listing of ARM in 2023 is the best path forward for the company and its stakeholders. He added that the company will consider a UK listing in due course. Listing a firm on a stock exchange takes it from being a private to a public company, with investors able to buy and sell shares of a company's stock on specific exchanges. ARM's decision not to pursue a listing on the London Stock Exchange this year has raised concerns that the UK market is not doing enough to attract tech companies' stock offerings, with US exchanges seen to offer higher profiles and valuations. SoftBank Group Corp's founder and chief executive Masayoshi Son Sun, said last year he would probably look to the tech-heavy Nasdaq exchange for potential ARM listing. ARM had a dual listing on the London Stock Exchange and the Nasdaq for 18 years before it was bought by SoftBank for $32 billion or £26.7 billion in 2016. Mr. Haas said ARM is increasing its UK presence and headcount, including opening a new site in Bristol, and will keep its material intellectual property, headquarters and operations in the UK. ARM is proud of its British heritage and continues to work with the British government. He said, "We will continue to invest and play a significant role in the British tech ecosystem." The government spokesperson said the UK is taking forward ambitious reforms to the rules governing its capital markets, building on our continued success as Europe's leading hub for investment and the second largest globally. They added the UK continues to attract some of the most innovative and largest companies in the world, and acknowledged ARM's commitment to its UK presence with more jobs and investment. Sometimes referred to as the crown jewel of the UK's technology sector, ARM was founded in Cambridge, England in 1990. Its chip design instructions and technologies are used by manufacturers like the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and companies like Apple and Samsung to construct their own processors. According to its latest quarterly filing, the company has shipped more than 250 million ARM-based chips to date and reported revenue up 28% on the same period last year. Efforts by SoftBank to sell ARM to graphics giant Nvidia collapsed last year as competition regulators in the UK, US and Europe probed whether the deal would push up chip prices and reduce choice. Rush Shaw, CBE, founder of Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates, said ARM's statement offered glimpses of hope for its commitment to its British roots, but ARM and SoftBank's decision to opt for a sole US listing is a significant blow to the UK tech sector. Mr. Shaw said it is also disappointing news for the London Stock Exchange and the heritage and future of the UK semiconductor industry. He is among UK tech leaders who have called on the government to publish its semiconductor strategy to support British companies operating in the chip industry and supply chain. He added, ARM's decision must be upheld as a case study for the UK government of how not to do it, citing the company's sale to SoftBank in 2016 as a factor determining its US-only listing. Nations like the US and China that recognise the strategic value of chip companies would not have allowed such decisions to have been made then or now, and the UK must now endeavour to proactively protect its semiconductor industry. They were called lunatics and imbeciles, idiots. The terms dementia or schizophrenia weren't known. Psychiatry was an infant science. In a Somerset town, a small group of volunteers are slowly and sensitively revealing the stories of those who lived at the Somerset and Bath Pauper Lunatic Asylum. Patients who were put in there were dirt poor, said Claire Blackmore, one of the volunteers. They had nothing, there were quite a few children in there. It often says in their notes the mother cannot cope anymore. The asylum opened in South Horrington near Wells in 1848, initially caring for 300 patients. It admitted patients from Somerset and Bristol and was later known as the Mendip Hospital before the building closed in 1991. It was run by Dr. Robert Boyd when it opened. He believed in the moral treatment of the insane. He believed in kindness, care, exercise, good nutrition and a bed to sleep in. He would feed the patients up. They would learn occupations, have music therapy, entertainment. He said if they could improve the physical, the mental condition would improve too. Land close to the asylum was set aside for the burial of patients and a chapel was created on the site. Around 2,900 burials took place there, but when the asylum closed, the cemetery was abandoned. It became overgrown and was earmarked for housing, but a campaign by the community in Wells led to the site being saved, with volunteers restoring the land as a nature reserve. As the patients were paupers, there were no headstones. Instead, each grave was given an iron marker with a number to identify the person buried in the plot. Many of the original markers have been uprooted and now lie in clusters around the cemetery, but the volunteers are planning to identify where each patient is buried and install a plaque to remember them individually. We've got the records for everyone who is buried here, said Peter Jaggard, who chairs the volunteer group. They tell us who they are, their next of kin, their occupation, their description from the hospital records. We're compiling a database and people can come and find their relatives or read about the working classes of the 19th century. Those people were well cared for. It wasn't called asylum for nothing. People think, oh, lunatic asylum, bad place. But people seek asylum. It was for people to be looked after. For decades, the lives of many asylum seekers, residents, were effectively forgotten. Their notes have remained hidden from view in the archives at the Somerset Heritage Centre, but are now being transcribed for the first time. Casey Redden said she often feels emotional as she goes through archives to research the lives of patients. I've been particularly affected by a little boy called Joseph Ty, who went in when he was 10 and ended up dying in there. I love him so much. He's buried here. I talk to him quite often. I talk to all of them. It has been so emotional. To see people either improve and go on to a better life or see people go downhill, it's an emotional journey, added Miss Redden. The group has received inquiries about ancestors from people living in America, Australia and Germany, as well as closer to home. Miss Blackmore said at one of the group's recent exhibitions, one lady had seen a picture of her great-grandmother for the first time. One lady cried. She said she had to leave for a while to collect her thoughts. I love this place. When we say welcome to the cemetery to visitors, it is not something you'd usually say to people, but we're proud. We're proud of the work that's been done by just volunteers and the passion and research which has gone into it. It's a special, unique place, she added. The cemetery opens to the public on Sundays and Wednesdays from the beginning of April. Death threats sent to pupils who damaged a copy of the Quran at a school have been condemned by an education minister as totally unacceptable. West Yorkshire Police said officers had spoken to a child alleged to have made threats and given words of advice. The cover of the Islamic text was torn and some pages marked when it was brought into Kettlethorpe High School in Wakefield last month. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has spoken of deep concern over the case. 4 students were suspended as a result of the incident. A Year 10 student brought the Islamic text to school on the 23rd of February, reportedly as part of a dare. The boy's mother, who said he is 14 and has high-functioning autism, said he had received death threats over the incident. Police said they have investigated a report of a malicious communications offence. A Force spokesperson added, a suspect was identified who was also a child, and they were given words of advice by an officer. The Force added they recorded the damage done to the religious text as a hate incident, but officers were satisfied no criminal offences were committed. Officers were conducting additional reassurance patrols in the area of the school, police said. Ministers for Schools Nick Gibb said his department was working with the school. He said, my first priority is always the well-being of children and young people. The death threats reportedly issued against the pupils are totally unacceptable. There is no blasphemy law in this country, and schools should be promoting the fundamental British values of respect for rule of law, individual liberty and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. Mr Gibb added that the Department for Education was working closely with the school and he would be writing to its head teacher and a local authority to offer his support. Our guidance for schools on how to manage suspensions is clear, stating that all decisions should be reasonable, fair and proportionate, he said. Mr Gibbs' comments followed a meeting held at the school with community leaders, during which the pupil's mother claimed death threats had been made against her son. In a video recording posted online, she said she had been left absolutely petrified following the incident involving the Quran. Kettlethorpe High School's head teacher, Tudor Griffiths, said, we would like to reassure all our community that the Holy Book remains fully intact and that our initial inquiries indicate there was no malicious intent by those involved. However, we have made it very clear that their actions did not treat the Quran with the respect it should have, so those involved have been suspended and we will be working with them to ensure they understand why their actions were unacceptable. Miss Braverman says the case raises broader issues about free speech. She has promised to work with education officials on new guidance for schools to make clear that teachers do not have to answer to self-appointed community activists. Writing in the Times, Miss Braverman said, we do not have blasphemy laws in Great Britain and must not be complicit in the attempts to impose them on this country. There is no right not to be offended. There is no legal obligation to be reverent towards any religion. The Home Secretary said respect for freedom of speech was going in the wrong direction and Islam should not expect a special status to protect the religion from disrespect. She added, it is high time for leaders, real leaders, not self-appointed hotheads, to stand up for our free society. It is this country's sacred promise to everyone who lives here, whatever their background. Every organisation that answers to me as Home Secretary will be in no doubt of where I stand. A West Midlands police officer is to run a half marathon in memory of murdered Arthur Lavinia Hughes. Jess Davis will complete the AJ Bell Great Birmingham run on the 7th of May for Arthur's Angels. Arthur, aged 6, was killed by his stepmother Emma Tastin and his father Thomas Hughes in Solihull in June 2020. Miss Davis will also be running for the campaign that all social workers should wear body cams during home visits. There have been too many preventable domestic child murders, the mother of one said. Arthur's Angels was set up by Arthur's cousin Bernie Dixon and aims to keep his memory alive while raising awareness of child abuse and donating toys to vulnerable children. The charitable organisation said they are in the process of becoming a registered charity. Arthur's put through prolonged abuse by Tustin and Hughes, and a trial heard that after his death, 130 bruises were found on his body. He was also subjected to poisoning, to deprivation of food and drink, and made to stand alone for hours on end. Miss Davies said, if I can help bring some joy and happiness into the lives of children in care and vulnerable children in Arthur's name, then that's exactly the kind of work I want to support. The 42-year-old will also be wearing a Birmingham City FC top, which was Arthur's favourite football team. I'd love it if lots of people came to support wearing BCFC tops for Arthur, Miss Davies said. 13 members of staff working for Gloucestershire Police are under investigation for allegations of violence against women and girls. The force said this includes both serving officers and other members of the constabulary, and the individual investigations are at various stages. Professional Standards Head Detective Superintendent Alistair Stenner said the news was very uncomfortable. Crime Commissioner Chris Nelson said some cases were very serious. Mr Nelson told BBC Politics West that most cases were offences within the force rather than with members of the public. Detective Superintendent Stenner added that he wanted to reassure people that the force takes these allegations incredibly seriously and the processes are thorough. Female trust in the police was thrust into the national spotlight after the murder of Sarah Everard by serving Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Couzens 2 years ago. Since then, forces across the country have been working hard to reassure women and girls. In Gloucestershire, vetting processes for new police recruits have been updated since 2021, and it is also reassessing serving staff. As a result, Detective Superintendent Stenner believes more investigations into serving officers will take place in the future. I think it's inevitable that there will be more. For example, our Chief Constable has already put a very powerful message out in our internal bulletins, and we've already had at least one case reported to professional standards directly as a result of that. And as we build trust and confidence and try and win trust and confidence back, we will, I think, receive more reports. Chief Superintendent Jane Provert is the strategic lead for tackling violence against women and girls in the country and says women in Gloucestershire do have trust in the force since the murder of Sarah Everard. On the whole, we haven't seen less reporting since 2021, so I suppose that gives us a measure around that trust and confidence, she said. But I don't doubt for one second that there will be females in the country that either didn't want to contact the police or felt scared or intimidated, because I don't think you'd feel human as a woman to have not felt some nervousness. The constabulary has a program to reduce violence against women and girls, which includes ensuring crimes are taken seriously and creating safer spaces to prevent assaults from taking place. It is working on improving internal culture, both around how women are spoken to when reporting assaults and how to treat female colleagues. If you rewind 20 years, the focus on culture and misogyny didn't exist. You just got on with it, and that's how it was. Over the last 10 years, that's improved drastically, and over the last 2 years around Sarah Everard, it's an absolute priority. Chief Superintendent Probert said she had experienced misogyny from colleagues throughout her 27 years career in Gloucestershire. I think the secret is how we encourage officers to be confident to call it out. 20 years ago, there would have been a couple of things I didn't challenge because I didn't want to be seen as a troublemaker, and of course back then they would have called it banter. I would say, and I generally mean this, Gloucestershire is in a far better place than it was. I'm so glad it's a force priority and we treat it so seriously. Despite all of this work, and many still think the force should be doing more to make women feel safe and confident in both public spaces and in reporting crimes to police. Nikki Owen is the co-founder of This Ends Now, a protest lobby group which was set up in the wake of a number of attacks against women and girls in the Stroud area. She says the group is really pleased with how honest Gloucestershire Constabulary has been around its shortcomings. However, she believes more should be done on a national level. The issue, and this comes from the police themselves, is that without it being statutory, the recommendations around violence against women and girls are not always a priority, she said. So what we need to see now from the government, and in particular the Home Secretary, is to create a statutory review of police forces, and by that I mean basically making it law to put these recommendations in place, and through that we get less perpetrators in the police and people feel safer. Last week, the Home Office announced violence against women and girls is to be classified as a national threat for policing for the first time, giving it the same status as terrorism. It has also asked the College of Policing to strengthen the statutory code of practice for police vetting and has commissioned His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services to conduct a rapid review of all forces' responses to the recent report into vetting and counter-corruption.